Hello, today we're going to know how to calculate customer lifetime value, CLV value on R. So let's go over the steps on R, and I have the R console open on the left and I have the R editor open on the right. And remember, the CLV calculation and its formula isn't too complicated. So today what you're going to probably get yourself a lot more familiar with operating and manipulating here and there values on R. Okay? So now let's start with a very simple formula. And if you remember, the formula for CLV is you have to have the margin and you have to have the retention rate and you have to have the discount rate. So this is just some value that I gave. I gave a margin of 100, retention rate 0.9, and discount rate as 0.1. And remember, the CLV formula is margin, multiply that by retention rate, divide that by 1 plus discount rate, and subtract that by R. Okay, so this is a very simple step. I'm just going to go over it. And this is, let's see what the results that I get. And I get a CLV value of 450. Okay. Now there's another different type of formula that you can use for depending on some of the books that you probably saw, then some CLV values like to include the initial margin here. And for those books, it says that the CLV formula is margin, multiply that by 1 plus the discount value and divide that by 1 plus the discount value and subtract that by R. Okay, so if I use this formula, then what I would get is that if I would run it, I would get a value of 550, and 550 is $100 or 100 more, which just happens to be the value that I had given for the initial margin, which is 100 right here. Okay, now that was the case for the CLV for the infinite case, but however, there would probably be some cases that you would like to look into in a finite setting. Okay, in a finite setting, you would have to use a for loop, so you can probably get yourself a little bit more comfortable with using loops on R. What you would do is that you would have a for, and you would have an iterator, and I'm named the iterator as I, and I went from 1 to 5, indicating 1 to 5 years. Okay, and I would have to calculate the CLV for each year, and the CLV for each year has a formula of M, multiply that by retention rate, raised to the power of I, which is your iterator, year in this case, divide that by 1 plus discount rate, raised to the power of I. Okay? And having that CLV for year, what I'm going to do is calculate the financed CLV for each of the years. So I'm going to add the original CLV finite value and add the each year's. So what I would get as the CLV finite would be the value that would retain all the CLV finite for each of the year, and at the end that would give me the last year's finite CLV. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to run this. Okay, and it seems that my 5-year CLV turns out to be $250. Okay, and just to make sure that this is doing correctly, what I'm going to do is I'm going to probably have a print of my CLV for each year. And if I run this, you notice that the CLV for each year is being printed. And if you calculate from 82, 67, and all the way down to 36, then you would probably get a sum of 285. Okay, and obviously you can change this to some other year. For example, I'm going to do it for 30 years. Okay, and if I do this again and run it again, and it seems that my CLV value is $448, $49. And you probably notice that this isn't too surprising because it has to be very close to the infinite case. I'm sorry, where's the infinite case here? So infinite case, which happened to be 450. 450 was the infinite case, and going from 1 to 30 years is, I guess, pretty close to the infinite case. So that's why you get a value that is very similar to 450. Okay, now that was the CLV for the finite setting. But however, for some people who use the CLV with initial margins, maybe in that case you would also like to calculate the CLV using the finite setting with the initial margins. And in this case, let's use it for this value here. And yes, the formula is still the same. The only thing that actually changes is that now you are going from not 1 to 5 years, but you are including the first iterator as 0. Okay, so everything just stays the same, and the only thing that is changing is that I've changed this 1 to 0. Okay, and if I run this, then I get a value of 385. And this isn't too surprising because this is actually 100 more compared to the 285 that I got previously. Okay, so this just using the same formula, but however I use my iterator going from 0 to 5, and obviously I can change this to 30 and whatever year that you would have in mind. But other than that, this would be how you would do for the CLV calculation with finite setting with initial margin. Okay. Now this is a more of a fabricated case. We probably want to do this in a more interesting one. So what I would do is let's look at a real case here. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to try to calculate the CLV for AT&T because AT&T is making a lot of money and they have a lot of subscribers, and just wanted to see what kind of a CLV they would have. Okay, so I'm going to go into their investor relationship site. So I would go into this site, and what I see is that this is the quarterly earnings that AT&T gets. And right here, I'm going to click on the MS Excel. Okay. And this Excel file has all the information of what we probably need to calculate the CLV. So once I open it, where I'm going to go is I'm going to go to business segment. And business segment, you'll probably notice that there is the revenue here. This is the revenue. And there's the expenses, so that's the cost. And now we have the segment contribution, so this is our margin. And they probably have this for starting from the fourth quarter of 2015, and it's 8 quarters coming to third quarter of this year of 2016. Okay, now we have the margin information, and we probably want to go over to look at the subscriber information. So it seems that they have this subscriber information, and it is right here. So it goes from 65, this is in thousands, so this should be 65 million, and all the way to 79 million here. And we also have the churn rate. Okay, now we don't have the retention rate, but churn rate can be used because if you have one subtract churn rate, that becomes the retention rate. So we could use that information. So it seems that we could use a lot of information here and use that to calculate the CLV. So what I did was that I just copied everything and I just made it as a column here. This doesn't really look nice. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to probably open this with a notepad. So there we go. So now I just copied operating revenues and expenses, the contribution, which is the margin, and total subscribers and post churn rates. Okay, so this is a tab delineated text file here. So I saved it on my desktop. Okay, and now I could probably go back to R. Now going back to R, I'm going to read this in, and remember it didn't have any header, so I put as header as false, and it was a tab delineated. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read in this file. Okay. Okay, now I read it in. Okay, now I'm just going to rename a little bit and try to get what I want. So that is, I don't need all the columns, and I need to rename just the rows to have revenue, cost, and margin, and number of subscribers and churn. So I'm going to rename it, and I'm going to also rename the columns, just not going from fourth quarter 2014 and third quarter 2016. I'm just going to rename it as 1 to 8 here. Okay, so doing that, I named it as AT&T2. So AT&T2 would be this information. You probably notice that it's very similar to what I had in the file originally. So I had the revenue as the first row, cost as the second row, margin as the third, number of subscribers at the fourth, and churn rate on the fifth. And I just went from first quarter, second quarter, all the way to eighth quarter, which was indicating the third quarter of 2016. Okay, now having that in mind, let's try to calculate the CLV, in this case first for the infinite case. Now, we don't have the discount rate, so I'm just going to give it a discount rate of 0.1, 0.01. So, which means that roughly a 4% discount rate per year. And I know discount rate is sometimes used as the interest rate, and our current interest rate is probably a little bit less than 4.4%. But however, I guess 1% per quarter, so roughly 4% is still probably a nice value to use. But obviously, you can change this value around a little bit. And probably you noticed that the revenue and the cost and margin were all in millions. So I multiply a million to the columns that I had. And this is how you would refer to a particular column from a matrix. So I'm referring to the first row here from the AT&T2. So this will be my new revenue. And my cost, which was the second row in the matrix AT&T2, and all the way down to the last case, which was the retention rate. However, I have to subtract 1 from it because I had the churn rate here. So the churn rate was on the fifth row, and I subtract that by 1. Okay. So now trying to calculate the CLV for the each case, obviously this would return a very large value, so it will be too large. So what I'm going to do is that I'm just going to have it as such, indicating that the CLV is given as by a subscriber because I'm dividing the margin by a subscriber. And just let's see what kind of a result that I would get if I were to run this. Okay. So now this is the value that I get. And you probably notice that the CLV, it's a very large value. It's up into way of the roughly around $160 billion for AT&T for all the subscribers they have. And if you calculate the CLV, obviously this is way too large. But however, if I go it per subscriber, I roughly get around $2,500 as a CLV per subscriber for a lifetime. In this case, that is a infinite lifetime. And it goes on the second quarter roughly around 3,200, and it does vary somewhat, but it seems that on average the customer lifetime value for AT&T per subscriber is roughly around $3,000. And that kind of, makes sense. It's not a absurdly large value, and it seems that that's how much they make per subscriber. Okay. Now that was the infinite case, and it will probably be a little bit more interesting if we were to do the finite case. Now, everything is going to be the same, and the only difference is that now I have to have a for loop here. For loop going from 1 to, in this case, I did it for 12 quarters. So that would be 3 years. So I wanted to calculate the CLV for 3 years. It probably makes sense to calculate for a finite value for the CLV because technology changes. In that case, that could lead to changes in customer value for the carriers like AT&T, and maybe 3 years we will probably see in different technology. Currently we have the LTE, but maybe in that case we'll have the LTE-A, which would probably give a little bit more value towards AT&T and so on. So I use it for 3 years, but obviously you can change this to 5 years or 10 years or whatever year that you want. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to calculate for the CLV for each quarter. Okay, and this is the formula. Okay, and with that in mind, what I'm going to do is I'm going to calculate the CLV for the finite case, which is going to be adding each CLV for each quarter, putting that in a value to a CLV finite, and I'm going to repeat that for 12 quarters, this case. But obviously, this is going to give a very large value, probably a lot meaningless value for us. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to repeat that for the per subscriber case. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to divide the margin by per subscriber, and this will be my CLV by quarter per subscriber. And having this value, then what I'm going to do is do a CLV for finite case per subscriber, and later on I'm going to just print this value because this is probably something that is a little bit more meaningful for us to calculate. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to run this. Okay, so this is the value that I get for the CLV for the finite case per subscriber for 3 years. So it seems that it roughly runs between 550 to 650, and roughly around 600 seems like the average margin that AT&T is getting per subscriber for 3 years. Okay, I know it's going to be less than what we had for the infinite case, but however, it seems that this is how much money that AT&T is making per subscriber, and this is how you calculate for the customer lifetime value for a finite case. Okay, so I hope this was a good introduction to how you would calculate the CLV. We looked at a fictional case, and we probably looked at a more realistic case, looking into AT&T data and so on. And I hope you kind of enjoyed this video, and good luck on trying to run CLV on R. And thanks.